Does the Canadian intelligence community have the resources that it needs to do what it needs to do in situations like this, and also just all the other threats that it needs to monitor?
No.
My name is Matthew McDonald, the creator of the documentary series The Service, which is still in development, but that I hope will become the definitive documentary series about Canadian intelligence operations. Today's video, however, is different from the other videos on the channel for The Service. It's about a devastating, evolving situation that seems to have the world on edge. And I was curious about the Canadian intelligence perspective on this situation, which is why I decided to invite my guest today to discuss it. On Saturday, the 28th of February 2026, at approximately 9:45 a.m. Iranian Standard Time, the United States and Israel attacked Iran with a combination of missiles, drones, and fighter jets. 2 days later, the conflict has only intensified, with Iran retaliating against Israel, U.S. military bases, and other targets throughout the region, including, it seems, a UK Royal Air Force base in Cyprus. Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with several other senior Iranian officials, have been killed. In an article in the Globe and Mail last week, Andrew Ellis, who served as the Assistant Director of Operations for the Canadian Security Intelligence Service from 2013 to 2016, along with his former colleague, Alan Jones, discussed the possibility that Iran may attempt to direct its proxies in Canada to strike U.S. targets in Canada if the United States attacks Iran. Mr. Ellis is currently the Chief Security Officer at Incus Defence, and before that, he served with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS, from 1986 to 2016. During his career, he worked on an array of intelligence programs, including managing counterterrorism and weapons of mass destruction operations targeting Iran and its proxies. Mr. Ellis has agreed to join me today to share his perspective and insight about what Canada and Canadians can expect, or what they should be looking out for, as this situation develops. And also, to give us a sense of what the Canadian intelligence community is likely focusing on in light of this conflict. So, welcome, Andy, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Matthew. It's my pleasure.
In the article in the Globe and Mail last week, you and your former colleague at CSIS, Alan Jones, mentioned that CSIS will almost certainly be working with allied intelligence agencies to prevent Iranian attacks in Europe and North America. Now that the conflict has begun, can you give us a sense of what that kind of intelligence cooperation in a situation like this looks like from a Canadian perspective?
Well, I think you need to understand that this is, I don't think you need to be a genius to see that this thing was building up for a while. Vessels and attack groups and strike groups were moving across the Atlantic and the Pacific, heading into the region for quite some time. We have an enormously mutually beneficial relationship with the colleagues in the Five Eyes particularly. And we have a great relationship with a lot of other services as well. Services in the Arab world and certainly services in Israel. So CSIS would have been abundantly clear to CSIS from a range of liaison sources that something was underway, and it would have been expected before the assault, before the attacks. And my heart goes out to the families of American soldiers who've lost their lives already. Thank you for your service. And I'll say this was long overdue. The regime in Iran is brutal. They've been massacring their own people on the street. And I think that set it off. 350,000 Iranian Canadians, Persian Canadians marching on the streets of our cities. It reached a boiling point. But all that to say, further to your question, I think it's important to understand that this is an ongoing undertaking. Canada is talented in understanding and appreciating Persia and Iran. We've been doing it for a long time, and we've been doing it with our partners and in unison with our partners for a long time. So it would have been expected that our expertise from the intelligence community writ large would be relied upon to understand and appreciate what's going on. You asked me what would have been happening beforehand. It would have been sharing information about where things are, where people are, where we last saw them. That would be both human and SIGINT, signals intelligence, and human intelligence. It might be just analytical intelligence based on very basic information that you would have gotten through some sort of ways and means of communicating back and forth to be able to geolocate people. So in the event of a strike, they were prepared to do it. that they're prepared to act. We were not part of the operation, obviously, but there would have been support before, intellectual support, intelligence support, and then certainly that we would have been informed of what happened, where it was happening, and in the first tranche, what is happening in terms of all the people that are left on the ground, be it IRGC people, be it military people, MOS, their intelligence service, and a range of other comité, the religious police. How many of them are there? What are they doing? How are they responding? And that's shared together through information that's acquired from different sources. And that is kind of the beginning of the response to this crisis. If there are proxies of a terrorist nation in Canada or in the countries of our allies, we were already working on it. We being the Security Intelligence Service, they, my friends, my colleagues, my successors, God bless them. But yeah, they would have been working on it already. They would have a pretty good handle on what's going on, what the risk is, what the threat is, and there would have been expectations in the community leading up as this moved forward, asking the exact same questions that you are. The consumers of intelligence product, from the Prime Minister's office on down. What's the risk? What's the problem? What's the risk going to be if we say something and act in a certain way? So CSIS would have been deeply involved through the executive in informing government, because that is the job: collect, analyze, retain, and inform government. So that's what they would have been doing up to this point.
What's the extent of Iran's proxy network in Canada? Can you shed some light on that?
It all depends on the way you define it, I suppose. I've seen it in the media, how they define a proxy, very different than the way maybe I would define a proxy. There's an official kind of, let's say Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and others who would have been supportive of the Iranian regime and being supported by the Iranian regime while it was still functional before Saturday. So, we would have had an understanding, I hope, about who they are, what they are, where they are, and some of them are moving. So you're going to get targeting of various people and individuals and activities that are moving across the globe. Maybe they're escaping, and I would say the vast proportion of the first look at a threat are people running away, and it happens in every conflict. You think, oh, I know these guys are loyal to the regime; they'll do it forever, and they're going, I'm out. They got massacred. So the likelihood of a lot of people who you might have thought would be supportive of the regime in a violent way or otherwise have already decided, I'm not risking my life and my family's life for this. What are you risking it for? It's gone. Ayatollah Khamenei is dead. The Revolutionary Guard leadership has been decapitated. I mean, there's not much left in terms of the senior part of the military and the theocracy in Iran. So, yeah, that's how many there are. There would have been people, as I said, supporters of Hezbollah, Hamas, other terrorist groups in the region. There would have been some supporters who were, previously in the Syrian regime, for example. There are other people in Lebanon that Hezbollah people would have recruited and accessed a long time ago. And there's an expectation by Iran and the leadership of those organizations that these people would rise up when the time came. And again, the likelihood, I'm trying to put it into context, the likelihood of them actually doing it when they're ordered to, when what are you going to do to me if I don't do it? It happens all the time. I've seen it time and time again. So there are going to be some. The size of the network, I would say, it's certainly smaller than some, but we have a large immigrant community in this country, and that's what built this country, and we should be very proud of it. But there are people who have goals that are not always in keeping with our own. And there are people that, and CSIS would have been aware of them a long time ago. And from them, you use that as a point of information. So you were looking at bad guy one. As soon as this thing happened, what does bad guy one do? Does he cry and run and say to his friends and family, because we have it well sorted out, I'm out. This is crazy. I'm not going to have anything to do with this. Or it's time to retaliate. So you look at the people who are most likely to be violent or most likely to support others who are violent. And it works like a spider web. Who are you contacting with in the first hour, second hour, third hour? And the people those are in contact with, who are they in contact with, and why? If it could be a benign, get rid of it, because CSIS doesn't have unlimited resources, neither does any intelligence organization. So all of those networks are being mapped out, and they would have been mapped out before, but the response would be mapped out. What do they think of what's going on? What is their thought process? And then you map that with allied countries, and then the maps start to overlap. kind of like a Venn diagram. So you have information supporting information supporting information, and then you begin to assess the level of threat and act upon it, share it with the people who respond to that kind of thing.
So when you're talking about Iran's proxy network, you're talking about sympathetic organizations, not so much Iranian agents that are in under deep cover.
I mean, how many Iranian, as you have pointed out in your soon to be released documentary, I have worked against formal Iranian agents. I know what they look like and I know how they act. I doubt that there are too many of those. Those deep cover guys are hard to train, they're hard to find, and they tend to be more regional. Where you need to, I suspect they're all over the Gulf right now, and they're helping to target some of the targets that they've already hit in the GCC. So I would not be surprised if that's where the strength of it is, and they try and get it into other networks. But yeah, there are that level, the kind of direct Iranians. Then the people, like I said, the groups I mentioned before, those organizations that Iran supported, financed, trained, and had some sort of cultural relationship with, familial relationship, or certainly religious relationship. And then it moves down to the ones that I think are more unpredictable are those people who, as you saw in Texas just this past weekend, those people who are, for some reason, drawn to this fight. They are radicalized by things that they see online, and Iran has been very, very good at their online presence to get people on side, to get people to support them directly and to support them indirectly. At this point in time, and I've already seen it myself, just looking at there are messages being thrown out on the internet saying it's time to rise up. It's time, the great Satan has finally struck. It's time, for you as a young person who believes in the values of the Iranian regime to stand up and fight. And there are people that are radicalized because of that, and then there are people that are unstable, unhinged, who are going to look at it. Could be anything that sets them off, but things like this, it's so heated, and there's so much of it so quickly. You do get a lot of exactly what you saw in the U.S. Over the weekend. So that to me is the hardest. I mean, you know what you know, obviously, and you think you've got it under control. There's not a giant net going over the Persian community, because there doesn't need to be, because 99.99% of those people are amazing Canadians and courageous, marching on the streets of this country. You talk about Iranian agents marching on the streets with your face uncovered, chanting anti-Iranian slogans is extremely courageous. Going online and saying things even more courageous. Those people, it was time, and it snapped. So will there be a recourse? There could be. I think there's other targets beside Canada that are more worthy. The United States being the obvious, Israel being the obvious, both hard targets. If I were to guesstimate, and it's frightening, but if I were trying to get two birds with one stone, I would go after, the large diaspora Jewish community in the United States, because you hit the Jewish community that, is supportive of Israel, and you hit the United States at the same time. And you only have to fire one gun.
What are you hearing from your colleagues in the intelligence community about that sort of threat right now?
There's always chatter. They're not going to share too much with anyone, and nor should they. There's always going to be chatter. There's always going to be this vocal support. And we always said you have to separate the walkers from the talkers. And there are so many talkers out there. Talk, and it sucks your resources up. You need to determine very quickly, this individual is going to do something, and he's linked to something that can do. He has the wherewithal, the network to be able to do it. And then the ones that talk a little bit and do a lot of walking, the people that you see doing unusual behaviors that are inconsistent with what they would normally do. The horrible situation when you start going to hardware stores looking for, ammonium nitrate, that sort of thing, that could be as we've experienced in Canada before. It's an easy way to do something, and it's really publicly available and minimally controlled. So it's those type of people that you need to look at. And I have every confidence that the intelligence community, certainly in this country and in the countries of our allies, are well up on this thing. Not perfect. No one is. We don't know those lone wolf out there. And I don't like to use, because a wolf is a dignified, proud animal, lone Assholes. Sorry.
Lone actor, maybe.
Yeah, and
Um,
I don't even give them that. There's actors are nice too.
right. What do you think CSIS's top priorities right now either likely are or maybe in your view should be right now?
Well, that's a really interesting question because when you sit on the executive, you have a lot of competing interests going on at the same time. I think if you read the annual reports that CSIS has put out there, China and their China and influence over our election processes and their attempts to undermine the values and infrastructure and economy of this country is going to be a priority. Russia is sanctioned incredibly. We're giving a lot of money and a lot of support to Ukraine, as we should. And the Russian threat is something that we need to keep a very close eye on. We're as close to being at war with Russia as you can be without firing shots. We're supporting their opposition, their adversary. So you're going to have counterintelligence, counterespionage, some counterterrorism against other priorities as well, and they remain out there. There are still Hamas elements certainly in Canada or Hamas supporters that are only going after Israel and really have nothing to do with the Iranian threat interest. They see them as brothers, as kin in this, but they have their own issue and they've had their own issue since October 7th. So you've got that to look at as well. The list goes on. So there's always a priority, and that's the job of the executive to take that very little number of people and say, where can we have the most success? And a lot of it goes to going to your friends and colleagues in the intelligence community. Can you cover this? Can you cover this? Together, we can cover everything, but by ourselves, we can't. And that's the value of an intelligence community, both nationally and internationally. Then you take that. What role can I play? In some cases in my career, we as Canadians were really, really good at recruiting human sources against a particular target. Sometimes you can't define why. You just can't. You're good at it. So from that point of view, sometimes it's possible to share the load, and I'm sure that's going on right now.
Russia and China at times have enjoyed fairly friendly relationships with Iran, and I'm wondering if you see them becoming involved in some way in this conflict that might.
I doubt it. Russia is up to their neck in their own created war. They're going to feel it. The vast proportion of those massive drone attacks that come from Russia into Ukraine, those are Shahed drones coming from Iran. Those are over. China is much smarter, and they are going to look at this and say there's nothing left. We're going to back out and see how this thing comes out in the wash. That's the way. The Chinese are very intelligent. They're very patient. And that's really, if I were in their shoes, that's what I would do too. Let's just step back from this thing. America has the American and Israeli capability together is incredible. I think you need to look at two things. You look at what Israel is able to do with intelligence and technology to be able to identify and eliminate the top leadership of your adversary. That has never been done in the history of human warfare. It is an extraordinary capability and frightening to everyone else. Then you look at what the United States military did in Venezuela, where they basically turned off everything. And those were first level Russian and Chinese capability. Gone. Turned off the lights. Done. Protected. Went in choppers, got their man, left again. No, nothing. Extraordinary. It's equally extraordinary here. I guarantee you, Moscow and Beijing and others are looking at that going, "Ooh, we may need to recalculate. This is a capability that we never considered possible." So now your intelligence services from all those countries, I guarantee you, if I were sitting in the GRU, the Russian intelligence service, I'd be saying, we got to find out what that military capability is, and we need it too. And that's what they've done for generations. Go out and find it, identify people who have access to it, recruit those people, and get the technology. It's been going on since the Second World War, really, and even before that. That will be a huge priority for our adversaries. I mean, the Chinese are looking at that as well. You're looking at a massive, massive, massive input of money into the defense sector in China, and you just saw your biggest adversary just pick it apart overnight. That's going to rattle some cages, and I'm sure in the White House they're looking at that too, saying, "What does this mean for our geopolitical moving the pieces on the chessboard?" When my adversary, I just made a move that they never expected and they never thought was possible. Now what? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for What does that mean for potential peace in Ukraine and Russia? Russia has seen it. They've seen the capability that can be delivered to their adversary. And they've seen what happens when you don't come to the negotiating table and come for peace. The Iranians do what the Iranians do. There's an expression that they are a Bazari, not Bizarre, Bazari society. They're always negotiating, always negotiating. They're really good at it, and I have great respect for it. But when you negotiate too long against a fellow who seems to think he's the greatest negotiator in the world, and I don't know, he's pretty good at it, and they lost, and now Russia, China, everybody else is saying, what does that mean for the balance of power in the world? Is it really a trilateral balance or not? Or is someone way ahead? And I think it's the latter.
So, do you think there's anything in particular that Canadians should be watching out for in the next few weeks as this situation evolves?
That's a really good question. I mean, you look for things that are out of place. I mean, that's always the situation. The frightening thing for me, and the thing I would say to my own family is, be careful, understand what's going on in the news, be well informed. When something snaps, that period immediately following that snap is the most dangerous. So of the people that are the unhinged out there, the people that, as we saw in Canada, people who drive on sidewalks and murder people, it's impossible to protect against that. And the police are handcuffed trying to do it. They did it in Toronto. They did it in New Orleans. The list goes on. And things that are available. So just be aware of your environment. Be aware of what's happening internationally. Be aware of what's happening nationally. Our government came out and supported it. A political move, obviously, when you got 350,000 people protesting, it's in Toronto ridings. You got to do what you got to do. So they supported the American and Israeli initiative. They may have done it holding their nose. We don't know, but they did support it for sure. So that means Canada is in for a penny, in for a pound. You're a secondary target for sure, but you're not my friend. So those adversarial people, those unpredictable people see that. So what's happening internationally, what's happening nationally, we're supporting this. So we're not saying it's a bad thing, which would have taken down the pressure. The pressure comes up a little more. Be aware of your surroundings. Look for things that don't look like they belong. I do some work for pro bono with the Jewish community and have been since October 7th because it's dangerous and not terribly dangerous. They should live their lives, but it's something you need to be very vigilant about what's going on. So that's the kind of advice that I would give to them as well. Right? Protect your people, protect your family. Don't be predictable all the time. The higher level target you are, the more you need to take actions to protect your environment and protect your family. It's not the end of the world by any means. With the level of threat, I would say, is probably under control. But again, it depends on who you are. If you're in a large Jewish community population in this country or in the United States, certainly, I would be extra vigilant and be extra vigilant on what's going on in the world, what's going on with Israel, and what that might mean for others, and continually talking. If you see something, let the authorities know quickly. Let the authorities do their job, and they're very good at it. The more information they have from good citizens, the more you're going to be safe. They're there to protect you, and they have the capability to do it. Feed the machine.
In the Globe and Mail article, I think one of the things that was mentioned as a possible risk is the possibility of some person or organization based in Canada somehow going to the United States to commit some kind of act of terrorism or something like that.
Be it this threat or any other, the great fear we always have is that someone comes to the United States, I'm sorry, comes from Canada and does something in the United States, because what does that mean for everybody else in Canada? You become part and parcel to that. It's, you should have managed this guy. You let him, we have an open border, and you let it be exploited. I mean, as strange as it seems, it's a very high priority for the Canadian intelligence community to protect America, because America protects us. That's our side of the deal. And there would be nothing worse than something happening, somewhere in the United States. And if it was a Canadian citizen who was unhinged, that you should have kept an eye on me. But if it's something that was planned and created and reinforced while they were on the ground here in Canada, that would be extremely bad. politically.
Hmm. I get the impression sometimes that intelligence work involves a lot of prediction or trying to determine what the most likely outcome of different events or decisions might be. So I'm curious in your conversations with whoever you might be talking to in the past few days, if you've had any conversations about, what the likely trajectory of this situation is. Are we talking about a long, drawn out, protracted conflict in a power vacuum? Is this something that's over in a few weeks?
Great question. And I mean, I was watching Fareed Zakaria on CNN on the weekend, and he had a lot of interesting guests on, with differing points of view. Um, Regime change is very hard. We saw what it looks like in Iraq. We saw what it looks like in Libya. Arguably, we saw what it looks like in Afghanistan. Although, when our troops landed on the ground, it certainly wasn't for regime change. It was for Al Qaeda change. And, it evolves, and these situations are evolving. And it's a very, very delicate situation right now. I think the hope amongst, certainly I've been having a lot of conversations with current and former colleagues about this very thing from a lot of different nations. And that's the question that's bouncing around. Do you need to put troops on the ground? Or will the people of Iran rise up? The latter is probably more likely than we've seen for a long, long time because of the massacres that this regime were doing for the last 6 months. That may lead, I think we all hope for everyone's peace and security that the Iranians are extremely well-educated people. That's how it's different than elsewhere in the world. They're a very, very advanced society. So they're prepared and capable to have reasonable and thoughtful ways of doing things. But if they can rise up and they're not fought viciously by the current military and intelligence community in Iran, I think there's a chance that there's going to be peace. One of the huge mistakes in history was when the United States went into Iraq in George Bush II's presidency. They made the mistake of firing everyone from the government who was Ba'ath Party and everyone from the military who fed it. It was either Ba'ath Party or in certain part of the military. That created ISIS. That was a huge mistake. And looking back at things like the Second World War, you just take the top and say to everybody else, I forgive you, let's move on. And I think you heard that a little bit from the president before this thing happened. There's going to be some forgiveness. And I think that's really, really smart. And hopefully that'll work. If people who are working even in the Revolutionary Guard Corps, a lot of that is just an elite military. It's a bit like the SS and the bad part of the SS. There are guys that are just elite military. And if you say to them, look, you're going to have a new country, a new opportunity, your skills will be needed in a new country, whatever those skills might be. Just, do it for the right reasons and not, there's a chance. But there's also a chance that this could be a protracted mess that are going to require boots on the ground. And what that means for Canada, I don't know. But we have a significant Persian community, as we've seen, as we have a significant Ukrainian community, and lots of Canadians signed up to fight, for Ukraine against Russia. And I suspect lots of Persian Canadians would rise, join up a reasonable governmental force that offered a liberal democracy in Iran. It's got a chance. Again, the Iranian people are very smart. They're very well educated. They're very organized, and they're thoughtful, and they're creative and innovative. So I suspect that there's a chance on this one.
Well, that sounds both hopeful and also a little bit uncertain, which I think is probably the best we're going to get at this stage of the situation. But I suppose you have raised a question, which is that since Canada has officially supported this action, even if they aren't providing military support, if it becomes a much longer, more messy, more complicated conflict, is Canada going to be called upon to contribute militarily or in some other material?
There's certainly, I would say if this thing worsens, that could certainly be a possibility. If there's some sort of intractable but not extremely violent conflict, you might be asked peacemaking. I could see that would be a much better scenario. Obviously, with Canada right now, the military's in a tough way. They haven't gotten the resources. They're going to be, and that's great. But they're pretty stretched. From Latvia to Canada to elsewhere in the world. So it would have to be a focused group. But we have our special forces. I would be willing to put up against any special forces in the world, from SAS to Delta Force to Navy SEALs. JTF2 are absolutely incredibly talented and capable, brilliant Canadians, men and women. And would they be able to play a role? I would use them. They're really good.
Yep. One final thing, because you made me think of it, talking about resources. Does the Canadian intelligence community have the resources that it needs to do what it needs to do in situations like this, and also just all the other threats that it needs to monitor?
No. It needs to be, you need more resources, and you need to deploy resources, frankly, in the right places. This isn't time for what I would call pet projects that it would be really interesting to know X or Y, because it represents a threat to the security of Canada per se. You need to prioritize that which matters most. That which carries the greatest risk, and frankly, that which carries the greatest return. I think the intelligence community needs to have courage right now. They need to be able to take risk. You take risk to get rewards. Sometimes you take risk and it doesn't work. And that's a very, very difficult. That's why I hope and pray for all of those people who are making those decisions, from CSIS to the RCMP to CSE to the military, global affairs. All of those people are trying to make smart decisions and make it together, guys. Play together well. This is time, but find a way to aim your resources where you, like I was saying before, sometimes we had capabilities in areas, really good capabilities. Do it, and rely on your friends in New Zealand to do their thing. Rely on your friends in Australia to do their thing. And together we've got a map. Rely and appreciate that we all have capabilities, and that's very hard to do. Everybody thinks they can do everything. And that's in a middle-sized country like ourselves, and if in a frankly under-supported intelligence community, you gotta have the courage that someone else can help you. This is the time, I think, when you start asking those questions. If we want independent foreign policy information, do we need a foreign intelligence service, a formal foreign intelligence service? Do we need to augment the capability that CSIS already has with personnel, and support that with legal support and ethical support and courage support, which is now, this is the elected government. You need to say, if you're going to do it, you need to step back and let people do their job. Give them the infrastructure and the capability to do it. Give them the support that they need, and they'll give you what you need. And we do it in a ethical, humane, reasonable, and legal way. All of those things are critically important. And when we used to get criticized, and I know they still do by lots of people, because anybody can criticize what they can't see, and when they know they're not going to get anybody to answer back. I always say to them, well, they're evil, they're terrible, they did this, they did that. A CSIS officer is your neighbor. CSIS officer is the woman you went to school with, is the father who drops off their kids at the same daycare that you do. They're you. So that human being that makes those decisions grew up in your country, in your environment. They're no different than you are. There are people with very left-leaning views. There are people with very right-leaning views, but they work together to do the right thing to protect Canadians.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights, Andy. It's certainly it's quite an anxiety-producing situation that's going on right now in the Middle East, and hopefully there can be peace in that region sooner rather than later.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.